When I started playing Pulsar no Hikari, I was thinking, oh, this will make for a good video. Even if the game is just okay, there's so much stuff around it. And then I played it. Or perhaps the better way to put that is, tried to play it. Because Pulsar no Hikari is a disaster. One of those games where every design decision makes you go, why would they do that? But before I talk about Pulsar no Hikari, I first have to talk about Star Trek. Not that Star Trek. Or that one. I'm talking about Star Trek the mainframe game. It wasn't an official Star Trek game, but this simple text-based strategy game is one of the most influential games from the early days of computing. It stands right next to Colossal Cave, D&D, and Pong as one of the foundational games that much of video games as a medium is built on. And the reason I'm bringing it up here is that Pulsar no Hikari is a port of Star Trek. The ports of Star Trek are actually a complicated subject because anyone could look at the source code and modify it, and virtually anybody who was programming a computer in the 1970s did just that. And there are already several games that were Star Trek but with more action, most notably Star Raiders from Atari. So Pulsar no Hikari was on a well-worn path. That said, this is the console game that I feel most closely resembles playing Star Trek. The only really significant difference between it and a computer version is some very slight action-y elements. And those barely work as action. When you start Pulsar no Hikari, after the lengthy unskippable credit sequence, you choose how many aliens there will be in the galaxy and how many space stations. The goal of Pulsar no Hikari is to destroy all the aliens before they destroy all of the space stations. After you get your teletyped orders from headquarters, you're dropped off in a random location in a random space sector, and hopefully the game did not spawn you inside an astronomical object, because that will be fatal once you try to move your ship. This happened to me in my first game of Pulsar no Hikari. You start from the command screen, and while you're here, time is not passing. On the command screen you can see how much energy you have, how many torpedoes you have left, the status of the galaxy, and your current coordinates. You can also see your current damage report here. Hitting select will bring up a menu, and you select an option from it by pressing the select button again. The top option is Tsukai mode, or mission mode, and that's the overhead action segment. And I'm actually going to talk about that last because it's the most complicated part. Then you have the short-range sensors. These show you the positions of everything in your current sector, which are also visible from the mission mode screen. Any alien ships that are in the sector with you have their current energy reading here, as well as the ship name displayed. The long-range sensors scan the area around your ship, looking at the 8 neighboring sectors. This readout of information also corresponds to the next option, the galaxy map. Each sector is represented by a 2x2 block of characters. In the upper left you have the number of alien ships. Then the upper right are the number of asteroids. The lower left has a character indicating any special features in that sector. If there are planets, a star, a base, or something like that. And then the number in the lower right is how many of those features are there. Usually it's going to be 1, but very occasionally there's 2 planets in one sector. The report option just takes you back to the same screen that you get when you hit select. Warp means that you're ready to send the ship into warp. There's no downside to picking this option whenever. You don't use energy to prepare, you don't have to select coordinates, it's effectively a useless option. Similarly, the torpedo option is effectively useless. It loads a torpedo into a tube. So if you want to use torpedoes, you have to go to this menu, load the torpedo, go to the mission mode, which is where you fire the torpedoes, and then return here to reload the torpedoes. The final option is the phaser, and that's where you input how much energy you want to use every time you fire the phaser. This is a 4-digit number, and phasers automatically target any enemy ship in the sector. If the amount of energy you pump into an alien ship is greater than their remaining energy, then it just explodes. So what you do is use the short-range sensor to see how much energy they have left, then go to phasers and put in slightly higher than that, and then go into the mission mode to effortlessly destroy them. The catch with the phasers is that it's using up your energy supply, and if you run out of power, then it's game over. Okay, now let's talk about mission mode. Here you have an overhead view of the space sector you're in, and there's a crosshair that represents where your ship is pointed. You have a full 360 degrees of movement here. You rotate it by hitting left and right, and it can take a very long time to rotate your ship. If it goes too fast for you, for some reason, holding down B while you press left and right will slow that rotation. Pressing up and down will fire your fore and aft thrusters, and you have some Newtonian mechanics here. Once your ship starts moving, it keeps moving, and you can see the current horizontal and vertical speed in the lower right-hand corner. If you bump into the edge of the sector, nothing happens. The only way you can go to the next sector is using a warp. Warping is performed by pointing your ship in the direction you want to go and pressing start, assuming you've enabled the warp drive. After accelerating out of the sector, you'll see a counter for how far you've flown, and you press the A button to reappear in the new sector. Hopefully you didn't fly out of the galaxy, because that's an instant game over. The galaxy is an 8x8 grid, and every sector seems to be 8 ticks of that counter high and 8 ticks across. If there's something in the way when you try to go to warp, obviously you're going to crash, and that's a game over. So you might have to do a little bit of light navigation around hazards. When you encounter an enemy, the A button will fire your weapon, assuming you've armed one. As I mentioned, phasers automatically target any ship in the sector, and if there's multiple ships in a sector, then the power that you fired is divided between them. Torpedoes are fired at where the crosshair is aimed, and torpedoes travel relatively slowly, so you'll have to take some cautious aim. The alien craft will slowly float around, not really in any direction, and occasionally take a shot at you. If you get hit, then you lose a bit of energy. To recover your energy and torpedoes, you have to fly to one of the bases, and these require that you carefully maneuver yourself to the docking port. When you're lined up horizontally, a box will appear. Then you have to back into the dock, pointing your ship away from it and using the retro thrusters to guide yourself in. And that's how the game goes. You slowly work your way around the galaxy, hopefully finding the alien ships and destroying them, before they move in on the bases and destroy those. If you manage to destroy all of the aliens, then you win, and you get a flat screen of text with a code that seems to have been intended for a competition that never occurred. If you get a game over, whether by losing all your energy, crashing, or flying out of the galaxy, you go back to the main menu where you can start a new game. And if you start a new game, the game crashes. So if you get a game over, you need to reset the console, then sit through the unskippable credit sequence again, and then you can start a new game. This isn't going to surprise you, but Pulsar no Hikari is not a popular game in Japan. The very few people who noticed its existence also mostly complained about not being able to figure out how to play it. It seems likely that they just weren't familiar with Star Trek, the computer game. The big problem with Pulsar no Hikari is that it is a game that is packed with complexity that adds absolutely nothing to it. It feels like it's this way because the developers were trying to make things more realistic, but it's a false realism, and it winds up just getting in the way. There's these massive planets that get in the way of your navigation. They don't add anything to the space sector. They're not an actual challenge to deal with. They just slow you down. And the stars are even worse in that regard. At least the black holes as a hazard are something you have to escape from immediately, and the pulsar's energy-draining effects give a different kind of navigational hazard. But otherwise, those big structures just wind up being annoying. And similarly, you can have up to 15 asteroids in a sector. They don't do anything. You can blow them up if they're in your way with a torpedo, but there's no resources from them. They don't affect the alien ships. They don't even move around on their own. They're just lumps that are there, not doing anything. 360 degrees of navigation gives you a lot of options for movement, but practically, you really want to restrict yourself to just a few. And it makes steering painfully slow to have to go through that full rotation. The phasers trivialize any combat encounters. Even with the heavy energy drain, there's no penalty for going back to a base. and short-range sensors add nothing over the mission mode. All the important data that you'd get from the sensors could easily be displayed there. They took the turn-based structure of the original Star Trek computer game and poorly bolted on something that was supposed to be an action game, and that made both halves actively worse. Play Star Trek. You might not like it, but it's an important piece of video game history that you should at least be aware of. Don't bother with Pulsar no Hikari, though. That's the version that's a lot worse.